So today we're going to be learning about cell communication. So if we're going to give a definition to cell communication, this is the method cells use to respond to a signal molecule. Okay, and that signal molecule we refer to as a ligand. Okay, so we're going to be using that term quite often, so make sure that you're familiar with it. And when we're talking about our response, it could be any sort of thing. We're going to be talking about, a lot of different responses that our body's going to do, and our bodies are doing this all the time. It's responses, that are going to be to those signal molecules. And so your body's doing that right now, and it could be for, all sorts of stuff. So, for example, so why are cells going to communicate with each other? Why do they want to do that? So they're going to be doing that if they need to reproduce. So later on, we're going to be talking about mitosis and cell division. So if you have any sort of cellular injury, so like let's say that you got a paper cut, or if you're an athlete and you worked out and you have some microscopic muscle tears, your cells need to reproduce to be able to repair themselves. Also, if they need to perform cell death. So cell death is known as apoptosis. So let's say that you have a cell that did reproduce, and maybe it did it too quickly, and so there's some sort of genetic mutation. So if it can't be corrected, then that cell is going to be marked in order for self-destruction. And that's what apoptosis is. Apoptosis is cell death. And then also, if they need to grow. Cells are going to communicate if they need to grow. And so basically for everything, your cells are going to communicate with each other. Even right now, as you're listening and trying to comprehend, what I'm talking about, your cells are communicating with each other. So we're just going to go over some of the basics today, and then we'll kind of delve in a little bit more, once we've mastered those basics. So when we're talking about cell communication, we can divide them up into two forms. We have local signaling and we have long distance signaling. So when we're talking about local signaling, we can refer to two different things. We either have direct signaling. So when we're talking about direct signaling, we can have, for example, our cytoplasm being directly connected. So when our cytoplasm is directly connected, that allows for streaming in between my two cells. So for a plant cell, this is called a plasmodesmata, or plasmodesma for singular form. So my plasmodesmata is going to be that little opening in between the cell wall that allows that cytoplasm to stream. For an animal cell, that's called a gap junction. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more as we keep on going. So plasmodesmata is for plant cells only. So we can have direct contact where that plasmodesmata is streaming through, or if the cytoplasm is not connected, we could have a receptor on the outside of a cell that will directly bind. And that's how our immune system works. So if we have that receptor, then it's going to have some sort of indicator when it contacts another cell. So either the cytoplasm is directly connected, or a receptor is located on the cell membrane. So for example, my immune system or my immune cells. Okay, so our immune cells are actively working. So if I look at this little illustration, so I can see I have a T cell right here, and my T cells are responsible for recognizing foreign bodies. And so my T cell is going to have a receptor on here, and then, you could have some other cells that have these little antigens on there. And so what they're going to do is when they approach that cell that they are designed to recognize, so in this case a tumor cell, they're going to adhere to it, and then because they're able to recognize this tumor cell, other cells are going to come in and destroy this tumor cell. And that's how our immune system works. So this is direct contact. These are both examples of direct contact. We can also have local signaling. So local signaling is when there's a small gap between my cells. Okay, so for example, if I'm talking about a neuron with a neurotransmitter. Okay, so a neuron with a neurotransmitter. So I should have put a picture of that here, but essentially what that looks like, so I'm going to have, a neighboring neuron. Okay, so here's a neuron. Okay, and my neuron is going to release these neurotransmitters. So in between, I have what's called a synaptic cleft. Okay, and we're going to go over all this before. So all of my target molecules are right here because all of my neurotransmitters are being released from one neuron and going to another. And this is what your brain's doing right now as you're reviewing these notes. And some of you may be, a little bit sleepy, or you may be hungry. Your neurotransmitter is sending, or your neuron is sending those neurotransmitters to respond to a neighboring neuron, so that way you're registering what your response is. So we have direct signaling and local signaling. So the question is why? Okay, so what is the purpose of local signaling? Okay, what is my why for this? So the reason for local signaling is so I can have a fast response. Okay, so fast response. Help if I could spell. Okay, so my neurons are not firing all in the same cylinder right now. Okay, so that's the reason why we have local signaling. Okay, for a very, very quick response. So next, I want to go over long distance signaling. So long distance signaling is whenever you want to impact the entire body. And so if we think about some signaling molecules that impact the entire body, they pretty much all have to do with hormones. Okay, so the purpose of a hormone is to be able to travel throughout the entire body. It's going to be released by one organ, and then it's going to reach its target organs or target cells. And so because of this, long distance signaling works to send signal molecules to a larger audience. So, for example, okay, so many target organs. So just because it's reaching an organ doesn't mean that they're all going to respond. Okay, so you may have target cells within those organs. Okay, so we just need to remember, not all cells respond. So, a very good example of this, okay, so we have a hormone called HGH, and that's our human growth hormone. So, HGH is going to be released by the brain, and it's going to travel through the bloodstream. But what HGH does it stimulates bone and muscle growth. So it doesn't stimulate growth for everything. It just stimulates bone and muscle growth. So even though it's in the bloodstream, it reaches bone and muscle, which are my target tissues. Okay, so in this case, we're not targeting organs necessarily, we're targeting tissues. And so then, our bones and our muscles are going to grow. And so with this, we need to remember that usually these signal molecules are often hormones. Okay, and those hormones will be released directly into the bloodstream, and they're going to travel throughout the body. So we'll talk a little bit later about that system that releases the hormones, because we can have several organs that are going to be responsible for that. So next, we need to talk about our stages of cell signaling. So we've talked about, how the cells are located close or far, from each other. So how do they know how to respond, or even what they need to respond with? So we have 3 common stages of cell signaling. And I know on your diagram it's labeled, mine is not. But we're going to go ahead and go over these 3 stages. So, our first stage is going to be reception. Okay, then we have transduction. And then we have some sort of response. All right, and like I said, y'all just filled out, and mine's not. So we can see for reception, we have a signal molecule, and then here is our receptor. Okay, so the receptor is on the outside of this cell. So here's my cell membrane. Okay, so right here in blue, this is my cell membrane. Okay, or plasma membrane, whatever you want to call it. And then my little protein receptor is going to be located right here. It's ready to accept that signal molecule. So when the signal molecule comes and it adheres to my protein receptor, it's going to cause a response. And that response is going to be internal. So I have several relay molecules, and sometimes there's not several, sometimes there's only one. And it's going to go to a target organelle that is going to activate some sort of response. So let's go ahead and label these different steps. So my first one is reception. Okay, so with reception, my ligand binds to a specific cell receptor. It's not going to do our body any good if you produce a ligand and it activates any cell. It has to be very specific, just like an enzyme, extremely specific. So kind of like a puzzle piece. After that, we have transduction. So for transduction, this is a step or a series of steps. So I'm going to put parentheses S. That converts the signal and can also amplify. Okay, sometimes you need to have a really big response, and this is when that's going to happen. So, for example, let's say that you accidentally injure yourself. So you fall, let's say you break your leg or break an ankle. It's immediate pain. It is throbbing. It's all throughout your body. That's because that pain molecule was amplified. You're going to feel it everywhere. Lastly, we have a response. So my response can be anything. Okay, so for example, I don't have really a definition for this, because there's so many things. So for example, we have gene activation. Not all of our genes are turned on at all times. Okay, apoptosis. It's actually another form of gene activation. And enzyme catalysis. Maybe an enzyme needs to break down a molecule. Okay, those are all examples of different types of responses. So let me know if you have any questions. So we're going to be, exploring this a little bit further, looking at different types of signaling, who does signaling, and why is it, important, and what are our different types of receptors. So again, I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you soon.